Engine Performance 1, Test 12 from Engine Performance Textbook Chapters 24 and 25. That is the black Engine Performance textbook that everybody is supposed to have. If you don't have it, you will fail your final because you're going to have that, you know. So, all right. Oxygen sensor cross counts can only be determined using what? Huh? What? Yeah, what are oxygen sensor cross counts?
That's the graph.
I mean, you're excellent. When you say counts, what are you doing? How many times it crosses from rich to lean within a given period of time? You got me? Is this going up and down like camel humps? You want to know how many, you want to know how rapidly it's doing that. Now it's going to do it more rapidly when you apply the throttle. If you gas it a little bit, bring it up to about 1,500 RPM, and you hold it, you're going to see it switch really fast and all that. But if the problem with oxygen sensors is that over time, sometimes they degrade and they get to where they're switching too slow to be reliable, because you want them to be nice and snappy. You guys have seen the one where I hook the scope up to the oxygen sensor out there and I heat it with a torch, and every time you move that flame back and forth, that thing is just jumping. Really? You got it? All right.
So,
It's an oscilloscope.
yeah, it's an oscilloscope, right?
That is, but on that, you're not going to be able to know. You got to do it with a scan tool. I mean, because the scan tool counts them, because you don't know what the time frame is. You know, the cross counts. If you understood, if you knew what the frame was, I mean, the amount of time was, the time stamp was on that cross count thing, you could probably figure it out. But the oxygen sensor is basically giving you an idea of how active that the scan tool is giving you an idea of how active that oxygen sensor is, and that's basically what you want. You don't want it lazily moving around. When I used to, when I first got into this business of doing this drivability stuff and all, if I saw a lazy oxygen sensor, you know, the first thing I did was pop one on it, even if I wasn't getting a code, because that's just, you got trouble coming if you got a lazy oxygen sensor. Now, sometimes oxygen sensors can be lazy for other factors, but you sort of get a feel for that.
So I need to go ahead and change that P171 then, though.
Yeah, the P1 set P, yeah, you've got some issues with that, you know, you're going to have to deal with. That's on your truck?
Yeah.
Yeah. And over time, they degrade. Also, if water's dripping on them from the air conditioner evaporator drain, that ain't good either. And keeps, you know, cools them off. Technician A says an oxygen sensor, oxygen sensors can be tested using a test light or a dwell meter or a scan tool. Technician B says conditions can occur that cause the oxygen sensor to be fooled and give a false lean or a false rich signal to the PCM. B only.
What?
You can't test an oxygen sensor with a dwell meter.
What is a dwell meter?
A dwell meter is basically something you used to hook up to the distributor on a car, and it told you how many degrees of distributor rotation the points were closed. That's what you're going to do on that. You're not going to be able to measure that. Now, I tell you what I have used a dwell meter for. I've actually hooked a dwell meter up to the torque converter clutch to see what kind of, you know, like these torque converter clutches now are not all straight lockup. They're modulated. They'll have like 20%, 30%, 40%, 50% slippage, you know, and then, or in other words, the lockup will be 20, 30, 40, up to 100%. And so what I used to see was, you know, when I hooked the dwell meter up to it, you could get an idea of when it was 100% if you didn't have a way to check it with a scan tool. And I would do that on some Asian cars that we really didn't have a scan tool to talk to, you know, when I was trying to see what I was doing. Sometimes the torque converter, if somebody puts the wrong fluid in it, it'll make the car surge because of that torque converter, you know, slipping like it does. Anyway, that's one of the things they use a dwell meter for. Also, in your old General Motors computer command control carburetors, you hook a dwell meter up to the mixture solenoid on the carburetor, and you wanted to see it switching within a certain, but you're not actually measuring dwell for what the dwell meter was usually designed for, which was setting the points on a distributor. That's what that was for. Which of these describes an acceptable oxygen sensor cross counts?
Both.
Huh? Number 3? B. 8 to 10 at 2,000 RPM. 8 to 10 at 2,000 RPM. P0131 diagnostic trouble code is being discussed. Technician A says an exhaust leak upstream of the oxygen sensor bank 1 oxygen sensor could be the cause. Technician B says an extremely rich air fuel mixture could be the cause. Who's right about that?
C.
How about A?
How about C?
Well, you can put C if you want to, but you get it wrong. And, A defective oxygen sensor could be the cause. Now, why would an oxygen sensor signal wire shorted to ground? What's that gonna do? First, you gotta know what a PO132 is.
Did you get 5 or something?
Huh?
Okay. Because you kind of mumbled 5, I didn't know you were on 5.
Wait a minute. Excuse me. That's still gonna be A though. PO131 DTC technician A says an exhaust leak upstream. I did that one a minute ago. That's A. Tell you something else that can happen. And watch this. The PO420 code talks about catalytic converter not storing oxygen. If the oxygen sensor downstream of the catalytic converter is shifting at the same rate as the front one, then the engine controller interprets that to mean the catalytic converter is not storing oxygen and needs to be replaced. That's a PO420 or a PO430 if you got two banks. Okay, now the problem with that is the PO420 code does not always mean the catalytic converter needs to be replaced. Before you throw a catalytic converter on it, you need to make sure there's any air leaks upstream of the other oxygen. Because if it's got air leaks upstream, it can make it lazy and it can make it sort of mirror the one downstream, and it can fool the PCM into thinking your catalyst is bad when it's not. You see what I'm
You
saying?
had that in here one time before, man.
Yeah, we were talking about that. So anyway, 4 and 5 are both A. When the concentration of oxygen on the exhaust side of the thimble is low, rich exhaust, a voltage of what is generated between the electrodes? Now this is on a conventional oxygen sensor, not the other type.
Is it A?
That's B actually. Whenever you're above a half a volt, you're in the rich range. When you're below a half a volt, you're in the lean range. Got me? Now, let me tell you about this real quick. On some of these Dodge pickups and some of these Chrysler vehicles that I've seen back in the late 90s, early 00s, and even farther back than that, like in the early 90s, that oxygen sensor will fail on those. Usually when an oxygen sensor fails, it flatlines. But oxygen sensors can flatline and then come back. So you may get a code indicating you had an oxygen sensor issue, but when you go and look at your scan tool data stream, it may be beautiful. That doesn't mean the oxygen sensor didn't flatline at some point. Because I've been watching them when they were switching really, really good, and all of a sudden they just go bad. And then they come back. You know, I don't know why they do that. And I say, you know, got something to do with temperature. I don't know. Never have been able to figure it out, but I, you know, didn't have a good way to check it either, other than the fact that I saw what they were doing. You put a sensor on there and that problem goes away. But these Dodge ones, they would fail at 0.6 of a volt. Now what is that? Is that rich or is that lean?
Well, it said below.
If it fails at 0.6 of a volt, it's reading rich. So it says, I'm reading rich, I'm going to subtract some fuel. So it reduces the fuel trim numbers pretty fast on that one. And it hung up at 0.6 of a volt, which is a lie, and it starts bucking and jumping. And if you see the oxygen sensor hang up at 0.6 of a volt on one of those Chrysler products, and it starts bucking and jumping, and you got some issues with your oxygen sensor, need to replace. I've seen that before. But you would never think an oxygen sensor would make it buck and jump like that. And if you watch a fuel trim, it looks like a big sawtooth, and then it'll go into open loop and it'll level out and quit bucking and jumping, and then it tries to close loop again, and it says, I'm rich, I need to go lean, and it starts trying to go lean, and it can't pull it lean. And it'll recognize the fact that the engine operation is deteriorating, it'll go back into open loop. Open loop's when it's not paying attention to the oxygen sensor, closed loop is when it is. Everybody got that burned in? Open loops when it's not paying attention to the oxygen sensor, closed loops when it is. I worked in a field for 6 or 7 years after I learned that from Ellen Smith in Houston, because she was a really good instructor. And the shop foreman I was working with over there at that one place didn't understand open and closed loop fuel control, even then. Okay, a large amount of oxygen in the exhaust system causes the oxygen sensor to produce what?
Low voltage.
Low voltage is what you're going to see there. All right. What does the post or downstream oxygen sensor measure?
Behind the catalytic converter.
The amount of oxygen behind the catalytic converter. Number 9, when the oxygen sensor begins to produce a usable signal, the PCM enters what kind of operation?
Closed loop.
Closed loop. Now you know what a closed loop is. Is there a closed loop system in this room? Air conditioner thermostat. That's a closed loop. The air conditioner is able to measure the temperature in the room.
Oh,
Yeah. air conditioner thermostat.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a closed loop system because it's basically checking up on the temperature and trying to correct that temperature and then going back, see? My wristwatch is a complicated device, but it's an open loop system. It doesn't know if it's wrong or right, unless it's an atomic watch that's talking to that thing up at Greenwich. So you understand the difference between open and closed loop. Okay, the primary use of the PCM is for the oxygen sensor is to do what?
Fine tune the air fuel mixture.
Exactly, fine tune the air fuel mixture. Upstream and downstream O2 sensors are used to measure what?
Catalyst efficiency.
Exactly, catalyst efficiency. She was listening. Listen to this. I'm going to tell you something else that's really important. If you're working on one and you got 4 oxygen sensors on there and you pull a code that says bank 2 sensor 1, you better doggone sure know where bank 2 is or you will change the wrong sensor. You better know which one sensor 1 is.
It would be the one closest to the cat, right?
No, it depends on what side the bank is on the vehicle that you.
Bank 1 is going to be sensor 1. Bank 1 sensor 1 is going to be the one in front of the catalyst on bank 1. Now, where is bank 1 on a Chevrolet?
Probably on the left side.
When you're sitting in the truck, which bank is bank 1 on a Chevrolet? If it's a,
It's gonna be, because the Chevrolet is opposite of Ford, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's gonna be on the driver's side,
it's on the driver's side on a Chevrolet, but bank 1 on a Ford's on the passenger
it's on the
side.
passenger side.
So you better make darn sure you know which one's bank 1 or you will change the wrong sensor. The code will come back and you sold somebody a sensor they didn't need. And the parts house won't take it back and the customer ain't gonna pay for it. And your boss man ain't happy. So before you change any sensor or you go troubleshooting any sensor, you better make darn sure you know where that sensor is.
Why is it different?
Huh?
Why is it different between a Ford and a Chevy?
That's because the front rod on the crank is cylinder number 1. And on a Chevy, it goes up on the driver's side, and on a Ford, it goes up on the passenger side.
Oh,
They just always done that. I mean, it's just, I'm not exactly sure why, but they did, although, you know, everybody's got, you know, the one they like the best, you know.
Chevrolet cross, it goes, what is it, 1, 2.
Yeah, it goes back and forth like a
3,
Dodge.
5, 6.
Yeah, and a
7,
Ford goes 1, 2, 3, 4 on one side and 5, 6, 7, 8 on the other
oh,
side.
okay. You're right.
But remember, always know where cylinder number 1 is going to tell you where bank number 1 is. And you can look that up in all data if you got all data. If you don't have all data, you're on your own. Okay, let's see. Is it possible to test a heated oxygen sensor without running the engine?
No.
You've seen me do it out here, Shug, on the bench.
Oh, I didn't know he was meaning on the
But of
inside
course.
off.
That's why I got to build that little test stand out there so you can test it.
So,
That's true.
oh, that's true, but yeah, but.
Yeah, if you get a torch and a meter,
I thought it meant
you get a
like
torch
on
and a
the
meter.
vehicle.
No, you get a torch and, well, you're thinking on the vehicle, but you just testing the sensor.
Bench test.
With a vehicle in closed loop, the following post converter O2 HO2 scope pattern is seen. I'm going to show you the picture. And what does that indicate? Please.
Yeah, that's a good.
That's B. That's a good converter.
That's a good word.
Yeah, it needs to be lazy. With a vehicle in closed loop, the following post converter HO2S scope pattern activity is seen. What does this indicate?
Bad converter.
Okay, we're talking about a bad converter there. Number 14. Typically, yeah. You can pay more attention to an active sensor behind the converter than you can a lazy one in front as far as telling you if the converter is bad or good. You just got to be able to sort all that stuff out. For number 15, a wideband oxygen sensor needs to be heated to what operating temperature?
600.
1400 degrees. That's the wideband. That's the different sensor than the other one we've been talking about. The 2 internal chambers of a dual cell wideband oxygen sensor include what?
Air reference and diffusion.
Yep, that's right. Air reference and diffusion.
Yes.
When the exhaust is rich, the PCM applies a what kind of current into the pump cell?
Neutral.
Hmm?
Yeah, it's positive.
You sure?
No.
It's negative. All right. When the exhaust is lean, the PCM applies what kind of current into the pump cell?
Positive.
You know, well, listen to her. She figured that out, didn't she? Can't get anything past her over there. It's got to be the opposite of what the other one was, isn't it? A dual cell wideband oxygen sensor can be tested using what?
Well, I'm gonna say all of them.
All of the above. Oscilloscope, scan tool, voltmeter, and an order of fries.
Woo!
Okay.
Something.
In some hybrid electric vehicles, the wideband oxygen sensor can cause the PCM to enter closed loop when?
Reaches 60.
As soon as the internal combustion engine starts, which is what ICE stands for. When you're talking hybrid and you hear the word ICE, that does not mean something is cold. It means internal combustion engine. A conventional oxygen sensor has a reading of 900 millivolts on a multimeter. This indicates what?
A rich exhaust.
Rich exhaust, that's good. 900 millivolts is just a few millivolts short of a volt. A conventional oxygen sensor keeps the sensor at about how many degrees Fahrenheit?
14.
600 degrees. If you have a heater,
Okay, so conventional is 600 and the wide is.
wideband's 1400. If you have an oxygen sensor that is throwing you a heater code, and like I say, you can take an old connector off another oxygen sensor, and the two wires that are the same color, whether they're brown or white or whatever, those are going to be the heater wires. You can hook a light bulb in between there, plug it in like it was a sensor, crank it up, and if that light bulb lights up, then you know you got good power and ground going down to that heater. If the light bulb don't light up, you got a wiring problem. See what I'm saying? So I only had to know real quick if I got a bad sensor or if I got wiring trouble, because either one could be the case. Got me? Remember what I said? Everybody, you understand what I'm talking about? Get an old oxygen sensor, cut the wire, wire a light bulb between the two wires that are the same color. You know, some of them are brown, some are white, some are black. But the two wires that are the same color coming off that oxygen sensor connector are your heater wires. And that heater ought to have 4 to 6 ohms resistance. You can also measure it with a meter. If you measure that heater wire on an oxygen sensor and it ain't got 4 to 6 ohms, you know, then if it's wide open, then it's a bad sensor anyway. And that heater's like a cigarette lighter, sort of. You know, it just warms that sensor up really fast. They want that thing to go into closed loop quick. Let's see. All right, let me see here. A conventional oxygen sensor heater keeps the sensor at 600 degrees. One advantage of a planar type oxygen sensor is what? Faster light off time. You want it to light off quicker so that it'll go. You can close loop faster, because they were all about keeping the air clean. When the air fuel ratio is expressed as lambda, a lambda number of less than 1 indicates what kind of exhaust?
Rich.
That's actually a rich exhaust.
Less than 1 volt.
The lambda is what it's doing. Think about this. Read lambda is negative fuel trim. In other words, below 1 is negative. Think negative. 1, if you go backwards from negative, you're going minus, ain't you?
Right.
So short fuel trim going into the negative means the exhaust is rich. If the lambda is going above 1, color that positive, and that means your exhaust is lean. You got me? 1 is the perfect mix. Technician A says the wideband oxygen sensor, also called a lean air fuel, can detect lean air fuel ratios from as rich as 10.1 to as lean as 23.1. That's why they call it wideband, I guess, huh? And technician B says a conventional oxygen sensor cannot detect the exact air fuel mixture. And both of those guys are correct. The heater circuit in a wideband oxygen sensor heats the sensor to 12 to 1400 degrees. We've all seen that. A single cell wideband oxygen sensor may also be called a what? Air fuel ratio sensor. It ain't gonna be a nursed, it ain't gonna be a pump, it ain't gonna be an exhaust sensor, it's gonna be an air fuel ratio sensor. Number 28. When the air fuel ration, haha, they messed that word up, is expressed in lambda, a lambda number of 1 means what? 14.7 to 1. That's your stoichiometry. And can you spell stoichiometric?
STOCIOMETRIC.
Let's say you left out an H. All right. She missed that spelling bee. Okay. If voltage from the heater circuit bleeds into the nursed cell, the mill will not come on. False. A wideband oxygen sensor heater can draw how much current?
0.8 to 2.
8 to 10. 8 to 10 amps. I will tell you something else. There's a lot. Make sure that you pay attention to the fuses that are feeding those heaters, because you can have a blown fuse and that O2 heater not working, you know, cause you to have a code that might think you had a bad oxygen sensor. And not a bad idea.